The third thing we have to do is let's determine what state you're going to file this in. And I'm going to give you, and this is probably where it becomes fuzziest of all, which entity, it's pretty clear. And then I can give you some general guidelines. If it's going to own real estate, almost always it's going to be an LLC. How many members? That'll depend on who's contributing the assets. The tax, should I be taxed as an S corp or a C corp? There's some general rules, but this one, I'm going to give you some general rules and know that there's exceptions to everything that I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to give you the basics. For an operating company, and you'll notice this is green, operating companies, I'm always going to show in green just so that you understand where I'm going. Almost always, that operating company is going to be formed in the state where you're doing business. If I'm doing a grocery store, I'm doing business in Tennessee, I really need that to be formed in Tennessee. I can't do a Wyoming holding or Wyoming entity doing business and no, just file it where you're doing business. If it's a professional corporation of some kind, I'm an attorney or I'm an accountant or an engineer or a nurse or a doctor. If I'm going to set up a business, it has to be filed in the state where you're doing business. Look, when you're hanging a shingle out and attracting business and you're saying, hey, come to me because this is the go-to, I'm trying to make money in the state of Alabama, this most likely is going to be an Alabama entity. Operating companies are generally formed in the state where you're doing business. Publicly traded corporations, you'll notice anybody on the Dow, in any of the big corporations are always going to be Delaware corporations. Why? And then they sometimes will list those and file foreign entity status in various states. But why? Because Delaware protects shareholders better than any other state. And there's really good laws in Delaware for protecting the shareholders. Nevada, Wyoming protect the officers and directors better than any other state. And most small businesses, your chance of being sued because you're the shareholder are very limited. The chance of being sued because you're an officer or director. So sometimes for operating companies, we might go to Nevada or Wyoming. Sometimes we'll get to that in a second. Companies that are doing business in multiple states might have to file foreign entity status. So let's say I live in Utah, I set up my corporation, but now I also want to run in Montana and Wyoming. I might have to, depending on the nature of the business, file my Utah corporation to do business in Wyoming and in Idaho and Montana. And so it depends on how much business you're doing. If I'm going to have one client a year in Wyoming, I probably haven't established what's called nexus. If I have a big portion of my clients coming from Nevada, Wyoming, I might have to file as a foreign entity doing business in that state. And then another basic rule, private corporations that are not doing business per se in any state, let's say I'm simply managing my own portfolio. I've got $1 million in stock. I want the tax benefits of having a management company. Could I file that in a state with some anonymity, with Nevada, Wyoming, maybe Delaware? Yes, but know that whenever let me leave it at, most of the time, operating companies are going to be filed where you're doing business. There's a few exceptions. Let's say I live in California and I'm simply managing my $1 million portfolio. Could I set that up in Nevada, my corporation? Yes, because you're technically not hanging a shingle out looking for other people to invest. Those are the basic rules for jurisdiction on operating companies. Now, this is going to be very, very different when we come to a holding company. Holding company, the basic rules are wherever the real estate, if you're going to put real estate in a holding company, you're going to file that in the state where the real estate is attached. If I have a property in Minnesota, the holding company initially will be a Minnesota entity so that I've got standing in that state. I can evict tenants. I can enforce contracts. I can stand up in court and have my day in court and say, "Yep, I'm here, Your Honor." If you're not, the court has no reason to recognize your entity from another state. So whenever there's real estate, we want the real estate to be held in an entity where the property is located. Now, who owns that entity? That could be Wyoming, that could be offshore, that could be all kinds of things. But initially, we want real estate so that you have standing in that state. We want it to be held in the state where the property is attached. However, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, intellectual property, things like all my interests in other companies, that could be held in a state like a Wyoming, like a Nevada, like a state that has really good asset protection. The strongest ones traditionally have been Nevada, Wyoming, Alaska, South Dakota, Delaware. Those have really good, strong asset protections. So on those things, your $1 million brokerage account, or I don't care whatever size brokerage account, could be held in a state where, am I doing business? So I'm simply owning an asset. And there's some great anonymity laws that exist in some states where a lot of us don't live. Those are the basic rules I see for holding companies. Again, if I go back, operating companies where the business is, let's say I'm doing a shared housing project. I own 2 houses and I've got a management company. I would file the management company where I'm doing business. I would hold the real estate also in the states where the properties are located. Let's summarize this just a little bit, going back to our normal diagram. The operating company filed in the state where you're doing business. The holding company could be in a strong state, but let's say I've got 2 pieces of rental properties. These are nice commercial properties. And so I'm going to put this LLC number 1, that's in Arizona. Okay, my commercial property I would hold in a single member LLC in Arizona because I want standing in that state. This one over here is in Texas. Okay, so single member LLC filed in Texas. I'm obeying all the laws of Texas. However, who owns this single member LLC? That might be my Wyoming holding company in a very strong state. Maybe a state that offers anonymity like Wyoming, Nevada, Delaware. And so I want so you see what we're doing is we're nesting one holding company inside of another holding company. That's okay. I would title this property in the LLC, in the single member LLC in Texas or Arizona, but who owns that legal entity? That would be my holding company. So sometimes I can take I would take assets and separate the assets from each other, and I can do that very well in a holding company owned by a holding company.